How are we already halfway through the year? I swear I just looked down at my book, looked up, and we're in July. Like, have I really just been reading for that long? Like, what's been going on, guys? What has been 2024 so far? How are we already in July? And I think the amount of reading I've been doing this year has played a big role in this feeling. This has been my biggest reading year by far. Last year I read about 60 to 70 books, and this year I've already read 53 books. And having read that many, it was really hard to nail down what my top 5 were. So I had to give myself some rules to help with the picking. So no rereads on this list. So that cuts off Words of Radiance, Empire of the Vampire, and The Hunger of the Gods, which all were very strong 5 out of 5 reads for me. And I also gave myself the rule of only one book per series. Otherwise, this whole list could have just been one series. Now, before I break down my top 5 books to start off this year, I want you guys to comment down below your top 5 reads of the year so far. Rank them down for me. Let me know if there's something that you think I should read as well. And also, what I'll be doing at the end of this video is I'll be predicting what 5 books I think I'll be adding to this list by the end of the year. And please let me know what is also going to be your best upcoming read for the last half of this year. And while you're down there, leave me a comment. Make sure you like the video as well. Subscribe. We're having a good time here. We're talking bookish things. Now, starting off my top 5 reads of the year, in an interesting place, we're going with my least sci-fi, my least fantasy book on this list, and that's Salem's Lot by Stephen King. This was my most pleasant surprise of the year. One thing I've been trying to do recently is step outside of the box, get outside of the fantasy and sci-fi books that I love and adore, and try something new. Not that I want to read any less sci-fi fantasy, but while I'm reading so much, why not also read something a bit different? So I went very different and went with Vampires in 1975 Maine. In a small country town, we've got a vampire that's moved into town and things are getting weird, and some members of the town have to band together to stop this vampire. Salem's Lot was my first ever Stephen King novel and my first ever horror novel, so I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I know Stephen King's a prolific author, but I don't know much else. And what I discovered in Salem's Lot is Stephen King does fantastic character work. He can put you in someone's shoes in a very small amount of words where you just get a great feel for the character. He's also good at just putting you in the story. You get a feel for the town that you're in. I really felt whilst I was reading this book that I was in 1975 Maine. I felt I was in that time period, in that place. He just does a fantastic job setting the scene. He had a couple chapters throughout this book where he would go throughout the day with different people from the town. So for example, we would wake up at 4:30 in the morning and we would be at the dairy, just doing regular dairy things, and then something would just be a little off. There's just a mystery building. And then at 6 a.m. we're with a bus driver and he notices there's something different going on. And then at 8 a.m. we're at the morgue and there's some weird thing of a body. And then at 11 a.m. we're with a housewife and she sees some kid walking down the street during school hours. And he's just building mystery throughout the day, but also just putting you in the town. So you just feel like you are part of the town, you know everyone, the town's alive, and you really feel just the ominous threat that this vampire is. And then of course, the horror elements were fantastic. They weren't just on every page, so you really felt it when he added them in. You were just going about your day, then there's a mystery unfolding, and then bam, you just get a real creepy horror scene that has you just not wanting to go to bed. So there was a few times where I was reading this book late at night and I just had to switch to another book so I could then fall asleep, so I didn't have just creepy vampires on my mind whilst I was trying to fall asleep. I loved Salem's Lot and I'm definitely going to be reading more Stephen King through the rest of the year now. Then coming in at number 4, we have my funnest discovery of the year, and that was the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett, and in particular Going Postal. Now, Going Postal was my entry into the Discworld series, and it's not a common recommended starting point, but I think that narrative needs to change. I think Going Postal should more often be recommended for a place to start with Discworld for a couple reasons. Although Going Postal takes place later in the timeline, so there's already characters that you'll see that have been established in other series, Going Postal is a very easy story to connect with. We have one main character as opposed to something like Guards, where we have quite a large cast and there's a lot to keep up with. We also get chapters in Going Postal, which isn't a common thing in Discworld. Terry Pratchett doesn't believe in clear-cut starting and ending points in his books. He just writes books. He doesn't put chapters in, but on Going Postal you get chapters. You get one main character that you follow and a few other side characters that you're jumping into their heads from. So it's much easier to keep track of the book and know what's going on. But you also get a fantastic story. Going Postal is about a con artist named Moist von Lipwig, who has been caught and he has been put in charge of the rundown post office. The post office has been out of business for about 30 years because there is a big corporation that set up a bunch of clacks, kind of like a telegraph system, and they have a monopoly on communication, and they're not letting any competition get in their way. So it's a really David versus Goliath sort of story. We've got the little old post office with a couple of goofy characters and our one con artist who's very cheeky, trying to get this thing going. There's a fun little romance element on the side for our main character as well. And Terry Pratchett just puts as much wit, satire, and social commentary into the book as possible. So your brain is so turned on when you're reading these books because you're engaged by the humor, you're engaged by the wit, you're engaged by the social commentary. These are just the funnest read because your brain's turned on so much to read these books, but they're also just fun reads. They're so absurd. There's just magical little mythical creatures and gremlins everywhere. It's super weird and out there, but it's also a very wholesome, rich story that you're super invested in. I cannot say enough good things about Terry Pratchett and Discworld, and I highly recommend checking it out. And I think we should make Going Postal a more conventional point to start in the Discworld series. Then coming in at number 3, we have a book that I actually own a physical copy of, and that's The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, the first book in the First Law series. I've read the first 2 books of this trilogy so far. I absolutely love them and I can't wait to continue. Joe Abercrombie's works are just super engaging. He's got a lovely writing style, but what works so well about the First Law books is his characters. Everyone said it before because it's just so true. You just want to go through the day-to-day lives of these characters because Joe makes you understand these characters. You can understand why they are the way they are. So despite them being flawed, you're still invested in them and you're invested in them becoming better. Now, they get every opportunity in the world to become better people and you're invested in them. It's like, oh, make the right decision. Most of the time, they'll make the wrong decision, but you even understand why they do that. So you still stay invested and engaged and enthralled in these characters. I love the political intrigue in this book as well. It's not a very plot-heavy book, but there's elements of a plot building. There's things building. It's very much gives off a Game of Thrones vibe, but it's very much its own thing. So we have an impending threat of some mythical force in the north. We have a lot of political drama playing out. We have a lot of people vying for power. And then we also have a threat of war from multiple sides of this kingdom that we're following. It's super engaging, it's super intriguing. Without a ton of action, you can just stay hooked to every page because you're so invested in the characters, invested in the politics, and there is really good action when it's there. There's not too much in this book. In the next book, there's more, and it's fantastic. You've probably already read the First Law trilogy, but if you haven't, I highly recommend checking it out. This is going to be for most fantasy readers. Coming in at number 2, we have the sequel to one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Empire of the Damned by Jay Kristoff, Book 2 of the Empire of the Vampire series. Empire of the Damned does a fantastic job building upon Book 1. We get deeper into the plot, we get deeper into the world, we get more of the world opened up to us, we learn more about the elements. But the most important thing is we get more of this main character. Now, this story is told with my favorite storytelling element, where we have the main character telling us their story from the present. Now, instead of our main character writing this down, like in the Sun Eater series, our main character is sitting in a jail cell talking to a historian, telling his story. And because of this, and because Jay Kristoff can write character voice so well, we get an incredibly rich story. Our main character has a sense for the dramatic, but he's also just a pissed off older guy that will use any sort of language and not hold back. The banter between our main character, Gabriel, and his interviewer, John Francis, is hilarious. But also, any of the dialogue in this book, whether it's between Gabriel and his interviewer or Gabriel and the characters and the main characters he talked to in the story, it's all fantastic. The dialogue is the high point of this series. The characters are just rich, their character dynamics, everything there is just fantastic. The banter will have you laughing, but you'll also be feeling deep things for these characters. The character work and the dialogue and the writing style, just all fantastic. It's super rich, it's super descriptive. Jay Kristoff is very heavy-handed with his prose and his profanity, but this isn't just a character-driven story. The plot and the world building are fantastic. They're interlaced, just like in a Sanderson novel. We've got a world on collapse, and our story is intertwined with making sure the world doesn't die, vampires don't take over as the sun has disappeared. Our characters are hell-bent on figuring out what the Holy Grail is and how they can use it to return the sun to the sky so that humans can start living again, so humans have a chance of survival and can come back and take over this empire of the vampire that has been ruling the world since the sun disappeared. This is some of the best world building and characters in fantasy, fantastic magical elements with the vampires, the certain abilities the vampires have, with how the world is laid out, allowing the vampires to have taken over, and with other mythical creatures that are in this world that are super interesting. I highly recommend checking out this series. If you want to know more about this story, I highly recommend checking out my other videos I have on Empire of the Vampire, where I really break down the plot. Now, picking my number one book for this list was incredibly hard because there is so many books from the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio that I could choose. My three favorites from Sun Eater are Ashes of Man, and then tied at number one, Demon and White and Kingdoms of Death. I go back and forwards between Demon and White and Kingdoms of Death because Kingdoms of Death is a much more contained story. It's supposed to be the first half of one book. Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man were initially just one massive book, but they were broken into two. That worked fantastically well, and I'm so happy they were broken into two books because it just feels like it just works that way. And then Demon and White is where this series really got going. The pace started picking up, the information, the reveals that we're getting were really intense, the action scenes, the battle scenes were fantastic. But Kingdoms of Death takes the number one spot for me. This is where Hadrian really goes through some really hard stuff. This is a dark, dark book. With the name Kingdoms of Death, I probably should have seen that coming. But things got super dark, things got super real. But we also learn a ton about lots of the characters, a lot of the backstory of this world and this universe. And we get some of the best character moments in the series. So this was the most emotional I got in the series, except for one scene in Ashes of Man. But Kingdoms of Death, just absolutely fantastic. We get a really just hard character journey. Hadrian goes through everything and has to come through. It's fantastic. If you haven't checked out Sun Eater yet, I highly recommend you do. There's beautiful writing. There's characters that you just grow to love more and more each book. There's some really great action that's very Star Wars-esque. And this is my second favorite series of all time, very closely behind A Song of Ice and Fire, though it's neck and neck for that number one spot. A Song of Ice and Fire just has it. Legacy takes time, so maybe Sun Eater might take that spot in time when the series finishes. Who knows? I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. Come on, it's a guy telling you how he blew up a sun to destroy an alien race and ended up, well, I can't tell you how he ended up, but I highly recommend checking out this series. And lastly, to finish off the video, my 6 predictions for books that will be on this list by the end of the year. I'm certain there's going to be a book from the Farseer trilogy on this list. I'm on Assassin's Apprentice at the moment, and I am just deeply enthralled by this book. I just started yesterday. I'm 25% in, and I'm just loving the richness of this character and this story. The writing is beautiful, and the narration is fantastic. I'm also predicting a Malazan book is going to show up. I almost had Dead House Gates on this list, and I'll be reading Memories of Ice in the next month or so, and I'm pretty sure that will jump onto the list. I just need to push myself to get started because these Malazan books are big and dense, and I need to be paying attention, so I'll be doing that soon. And then I'm absolutely certain a 5 Warrior Angels book is going to be on this list. Now, I don't know how many of these books I'm going to read, but I believe the most recent one I would have read will make the top list. So whether it's the first book or I get all the way through and get to the Lonesome Crown and finish off the list, I'm certain one of those books will make the list. Brian Lee Durfee is a big fan of all my favorite authors, and his series is like a combination of the Dragonbone Trail, A Song of Ice and Fire, The Faithful and the Fallen. So I'm certain I'm going to love that series, and I just really want to find the time to read it because I know how much I'm going to love it. And I'm definitely predicting that the 5th Stormlight book is going to be on this list because I'm a massive Stormlight fan. I love the first 2 books a ton, and I'm certain book 5 is going to bring this arc to a lovely end. And of course, I have to put Fury of the Gods on this list. The Shadow of the Gods is the book that led to all of this. This was the first book after reading the Witcher series over about 7 months, I picked up this book and read it in a week. And then I picked up the Mistborn trilogy. And then I picked up Hunger of the Gods when it came out. And then this just blew up. I just started reading all the time. So I'm certain I'm going to love Fury of the Gods. And then one book that could be my number one read for the year. The Last Argument of Kings. I really love the first two books in this series, and I'm certain this is going to be better than both of them. I cannot wait to finish off the First Law trilogy. And with that, please let me know what your guys' lists are. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.